Hi all, good morning. We're gonna start the talk by doing a little bit of a shakeout to reset. So everybody stand up, please, if you are able. And put your arms in the air and take 2 big deep breaths with your arms staying up here. And open your mouth and make a sound. One more, make a louder sound. In and let it out, make a sound. And this time let your arms come down. And then start shaking out your arms and your legs too. Entire body shake. Open your mouth again and let some sound come out. Make it louder. Make it quiet. Close your mouth. And be still. Have a seat if you wish. All right. I'm so pleased to be here. I was here last year. Jerry Robson invited me to the class. Hello to students who I may have met last year. I just moved to Halifax after being in the States for 10 years, so I'm getting used to the place, but I'm originally from New Brunswick. So today I'm going to be talking about this project that it's in the research and development stage. I'm also very curious about it. I'm still figuring it out. And this will be the first time that I've shared some of the kind of in-progress research that I'm doing about it. So I'm really interested in feedback. The project is going to be moving me into the realm of architecture and photography, which I have no background in. So if this is your area of expertise, I want to hear from you. So I want to start with thank yous. There's been so many folks who I've been consulting with, who have been supporting the research and the ideas. And I'm going to speak very briefly about each. So Aslan Thomas, we've been talking through ideas about accessibility and social sculpture and sharing space and experiencing art. I've borrowed some convex lenses from Alex at NASCAD. I worked out a lot of design ideas last year at a residency at Banff. Beth Pickens is an incredible consultant of artists. Bonita Domes, master dome builder in the high desert. Deirdre McGarren, so cool, a graduate of Mount Allison, Straw Works, so she's been advising on raw plaster. Who do we have? Donald Lawrence, who curated the Midnight Sun camera obscura up in the Yukon. Irene from the Armory Center for the Arts in Pasadena, which is a non-for-profit art center where I worked as a teaching artist for many years, and from whence the Hairy Orange was kind of born, initiated the idea. Julie, a student of mine who kind of reminded me how exciting camera obscura is by doing a micro-teaching workshop in a course I was teaching. Kim Kelly is my partner in life. Nettles is my cat. Marco Cervantes, a master dome builder. Nicole Kelly-Westman, taking photos last summer when we were at Banff in this wearable camera obscura that we'll be looking at later. Paige Gratlin, bootmaker, who was here last year at a handmade assembly, best friend, incredible advisor, always helping writing grants. Rita McCoy, we collaborated on a video last year, and then developed some more of this project through a recent residency in Maine at the Tides Institute, and then I've been consulting with some architects at Dalhousie. This is made possible by funding from the Canada Council for the Arts. I'm super jazzed and appreciative of this. And again, the Armory is the non-for-profit that I worked for. Okay, so starting with the idea of place and being here. Since coming to Nova Scotia, I've been hanging out in bogs. And in bogs, one finds at this time of year cranberries. I have some frozen cranberries. I invite you, if you wish, to take one and set it in your mouth and hold it in your mouth for as long as you dare. You can let your own body heat kind of melt this food, this fruit in your mouth. You can chomp it, you be you, do what you want. And this experience of kind of tasting and sensing place with our mouth is something that I'm inspired by the work of Diane Borsato. And Diane came to one of my classes last year and brought in chocolate for all of us to taste. So in kind of consuming or partially consuming this cranberry that is a regional fruit, I want to also think about where it came from, how it got here in this room, in your mouth, maybe. And so really kind of placing ourselves and this thing in concert and kind of imagining the path that it took and maybe what's at stake and how we grow food, move food, and kind of, thinking about agriculture in that way as well. So I'm going to pass these around. It's cold. Grab them, put it in your mouth, only if you want to. These two images kind of embody the ideas that I'm thinking through right now with the hairy orange. So the cube, and then I just found out about Melissa Morris, who makes these fantastic small cube. Are they handmade? Are they hand-stitched? Do folks know? Yeah, patches? Very cool. So thinking about scale, handmade, the idea of monument and memento are things that I'm working through in this project with the hairy orange. I will also pause to talk about my understanding of this cube is that the folks who built it began by harvesting and processing cranberries. So in this, there are many frozen cranberries, and in you, frozen cranberry as well. So the hairy orange. What we're looking at right now is a digital rendering of this dome. So the idea is that, well, we're going to get to there. But the idea is that the hairy orange is going to be a social sculpture that will be a hub for programming, and it will be built with Superadobe architecture, and we're going to look at that later. There will also be collaborations with community groups, including a group called Project Q. This is the Airstream trailer that we see. And all of these things kind of are culminating in this project, and this project is really informed by almost 20 years of working in the public realm, working with multiple diverse publics, and working mostly in mobile art projects and handmade small artist multiples. So I'm going to begin with Projet Mobile Livre, the Bookmobile project. Shout out to the folks in this room who supported this project, who hosted Projet Mobile Livre. So Projet Mobile Livre was active in between 2000 and 2005. We were based in Montreal and Philadelphia with core co-founders, of which I am one. But the project really expanded to have almost 20 people in a collective. So we had a horizontal organizational, kind of horizontal feminist organizing structure. And we bought an Airstream trailer, filled it with artist books and zines, and toured for 5 years. So this is a project that I started directly out of school when I was an undergrad at Concordia. And the project was truly a community effort and also quite scrappy. In doing this project, I learned everything I know about how to be an artist, how to write grants, how to reach out to potential partners, hosts. I guess the way that we initially funded the project was by art auctions, dance parties, getting sponsorships, selling drinks at these dance parties, and really kind of activating the community of folks in Montreal and in Philadelphia to kind of work together and figure out how we would book tours, make merch, and have a call for submissions. So we're looking on your left of the interior of the trailer. So the trailer we purchased for $1,000 in the year 2001 in California, and one of the folks, Courtney Daly, who was one of the co-founders, cold called an architecture firm in New York City called Freecell and said, hey, we have this trailer, we have this idea, we want to retrofit it, make a bookmobile. Would you do this for us? Would you design something and install for free? And they said yes. So we were like, all right, cool, everyone's going to say yes. We're just going to keep moving forward with this project. So Freecell designed this fantastically functional, really simple retrofit with bungee cords and storage areas. So inside our trailer, we had juried collections of handmade books, artist books, and zines, as well as independent publications. And so at that time, I was really jazzed about screen printing, letterpress printing, still am. And there really felt like a need and a kind of maybe urgency to be able to make these objects accessible to wider audiences than maybe folks who are living in major cities where there's like Bibliothèque Nationale in Montreal or artist-run centers. So in our tours, we went to rural places, we went to big cities, we went to museums, art galleries, as well as youth drop-in centers. So not unlike Paul's model of working, we would be able to visit maybe 3 venues that wouldn't be able to pay us for the visit, and we'd be working at a drop-in center, and then we'd get funding from maybe a large university, and that would kind of help pay for our gas so that we could disseminate this information. And so let's see, we're looking at a poster that was designed by Julie Doucette, an incredible artist in Montreal. So this project was also a kind of excuse to be able to reach out to all of the art crushes that we had at the time. So I'm not sure if we actually sat down and made a list, but there was this kind of idea that, oh, okay, maybe we can involve folks who are mentors or who we look up to or whose work is circulating that we're aware of and really excited about. And so a way that we did that was to invite artists, ask artists, and we didn't pay them, to design posters and merch that then we would sell. 10 bucks a poster, 20 bucks a t-shirt. I think it's actually 5 bucks a poster. Who am I trying to kid? And then we would be able to fundraise for our project. So here's an image of the trailer parked along, so this is kind of like a typical setup for the bookmobile. I'm not even sure which city this is in, but I included this image so that we could see the rack that's here outside the trailer. That's what we called the regional rack. So the regional rack was a place where folks could bring their own zines that they were making. They were not juried, but we would bring them and continue touring with them and exhibiting them on the rest of our tour. And I'll talk a little bit about the tours soon. Here are some samples of the kinds of work that you might find inside the bookmobile. Currently, these book works are at Art Text in Montreal, so not everything in the collection is at Art Text. When an artist submitted something to be considered for the jury for the bookmobile, folks had the option to ask for it back or to donate it to the project. So things that were donated, many of them have ended up at Art Text. Some of the things were kind of wonderful, freaky stuffed animals. They're at Art Text. And so here we see a range of things from one-of-a-kind books to zines. We had a lot of zines that had, I would say, kind of radical content made by social justice groups, soft sculpture, limited edition, and quite a range of different books, as well as independent publications as well. So after a kind of hiatus, so the folks who were involved in this project, many of us were close friends, dating each other. It was an intimate crew. I will say that, but there were also people in the project who I never toured with, who I never met, but I programmed part of the tour. So we were kind of this large, amorphous, wild collective. And so after taking a hiatus, we got together and the core co-founders put together a book. So I have the bookmobile book here. So we launched the book in 2015, and the book really is a chronology of the work that we did, the tours that we did, folks who were involved. I have a copy here. I think that there's a copy at Maunay as well. And to put this book together, we did a Kickstarter campaign. Thank you if you donated. It was a kind of thing that we put together from different locations. So I was at that point based in Los Angeles. Courtney Daly was based in Portland, and Leila Portavoff was based in Montreal and then Toronto at that time. So working from those separate locations, we got it together, we made the book. Here we're looking at a map that is inside the book, and it was an illustration created by Ginger Brooks Takahashi, who's also a co-founder. And so we're looking at an inverted kind of depiction of the tours that we did annually. Now, the first year we thought we were just going to go to Quebec, and then we said, oh, well, let's go to New Brunswick. And then Courtney was in Philadelphia, and she said, well, you have to come to Philly. So we said, well, we might as well go through New York. So anyways, each year we ended up crossing the North America, the continent, for 5 years each year. And so in terms of thinking of this idea, and this was Ginger's idea to invert the map, it kind of slows us down a little bit and also maybe makes us rethink about our position in North America, in the hemisphere in which we may be engaging with this book, whether it's here or whether you're engaging with it on another continent. And so really kind of thinking about the idea of flipping our sense of place. So keep that in mind, bookmark that. So at the time that the Bookmobile project was wrapping up, I started collaborating with Logan McDonald, who's arriving imminently today and is going to be presenting at a handmade assembly, and with Ginger. And we started working together, having these drawing parties. All of us are queer identified people, and these drawing parties, it was just the three of us. We didn't have to plan a tour, we didn't have to fundraise. It wasn't this kind of like administrative meeting and retreat. We would get together and hang out and kind of joke around and really tap into our own senses of humor. And this is the product of one of those jam sessions. So this was the Welcome to Gayside map. So Logan is originally from Newfoundland and had told us this story, and then we dug around and found this CBC article about a town that had been called Gayside in Newfoundland. And in 1985, kind of at the height of the AIDS crisis, the town unanimously decided to change their name from Gayside to Baytona. And so we wanted to celebrate Gayside and kind of riff on gay stereotypes. And so we created this map, joking around with lots of different things. I think there's the handlebar, UTI, as well as PEI, lots of different things. So this map circulated through it was made possible to circulate and be printed through a grant that Cecilia Berkvik, who's an incredible artist and graphic designer in Toronto, was able to kind of secure funding for. It was a newsprint print that folded up, and it circulated in LTTR, a transfeminist zine, and widely at Documenta. And then we also made a mural in Los Angeles at the Shared Women exhibition at Lace. And that's Ginger in front of the mural. So again, thinking about iterations from the small, something that you can trade, something that is compact, something that is inexpensive, and then kind of exploding that into a temporary site mural, for example. So I started my graduate studies, what brought me to Los Angeles, at USC, University of Southern California, and with the intention of working with the collections at the One Archives, which had recently been acquired as part of USC Libraries. My initial research was looking at lesbian comedians and looking at old kind of LPs and records, and soon that kind of focus shifted to collections that were starting to be cataloged at the archives at the time. So queer archives are unique in that their material content maybe is unusual and not what you might find in other archives and libraries. For example, the Speedo that belonged to the Olympic gold medalist and activist Greg Louganis, who was also HIV positive. So this is a kind of thing, this framed signed Speedo that you will find at the One Archives. And so my thesis work focused then on looking at and pulling out and responding to materials that were in the collections at One Archives. So initially, when I was looking for work representing women, trans-identified people, and people of color, I found almost none in this archive that supposedly has the largest records of LGBT records. What I did find was incredible, phenomenal printed material, printed matter, which I was kind of already drawn to. And then I responded by making more printed matter to some of the things I was finding. So the image that we're looking at here, this Reed Erickson wall. Reed Erickson was a benefactor of the One Archives and a trans-identified man, and had something called the Reed Erickson Foundation that produced publications that informed medical workers, law enforcement on kind of how to respond to the needs of a trans-identified person or someone who might have identified as a cross-dresser or even transsexual in the 1960s. So this was kind of like early work. And so what we're looking at here is some wallpaper that I designed, installed, and paintings on top. And the paintings are from the One Archives collection. And at the time that I was doing my research with archivists there, paintings in the collection had never been shown before. Many of them were not signed. Maybe they were made at a time when it wouldn't have been safe to sign your name to a painting. And so the work that I was doing was to display those things, put those on display, invite archivists to walk us through and kind of talk about provenance of different objects that were in the collection. We also had free haircuts, another bookmobile project that was happening in Los Angeles at the time. And then these are a few more examples of things that were in the exhibition. So looking at placards from ACT UP that was active in New York City in the 80s and 90s. And then also this thinking again kind of about public space and where a placard might be activated, and then a more private space. So the card, it's a small card the size of a business card that we're looking at on the left is a card that a person who might have been trans-identified or transsexually identified this card was made in the 70s, could keep in your wallet so that if you got pulled over or you got thrown in jail info was here. There might be a contact, an attorney, a therapist who would be able to speak for you if you were not in a position to do so, or if you were being discriminated against. So thinking about this card as something that would operate, that you would carry kind of on your person in this private space. So I included this in an example of this kind of thing in the exhibition as well. So again, thinking about shifting scales. The address book, we're looking at a blow up of it now, but the address book was also this very tiny size of a credit card, tiny book that was a guide for LGBT folks to find bars, saunas, hotels, restaurants that might be friendly. So this was kind of a predated what's called the Dam Run travel guide. So the address book on the outside, it said address book, and the inside had all of these different addresses and places that LGBT folks could go to and use while traveling across North America, and then it expanded to Europe and then globally across the world. So thinking about this idea of a small book that contains a kind of myriad of contacts and kind of bounty of community, I was invited to make a dust jacket for the One Archives catalog they put together for the first Pacific Standard Time. And in doing that, I invited archivists and LGBT folks in the membership of the One Archives to engage with materials from the archives, wear them. Sometimes that meant wearing a leather hat, fashioning oneself in the way that a figure was portrayed in a painting that belongs to the One Archives. And we did this very fun photo shoot. And so what we're looking at here is part of this wraparound dust jacket that went around the catalog. Some more work that I did then with the archives was to invite trans-identified artists to work with materials kind of in the same way that I was doing. The very few materials of trans-identified folks that were at that time cataloged and kind of held in the One Archives. Since 2011, it's grown exponentially, I would say. And really there's been a kind of lot of activation and incentive for the archives to collect more diverse objects. So then thinking again about scale, that which is wearable, and responding to archives, we're looking at some very tiny statues that were, that is an award that I made with Frank, who is a singer who identifies as the All-American Jewish lesbian folk singer. And so Frank had been active at the Women's Building in the 70s and 80s, and so Frank and I worked together to create a letterpress print in these miniature jackets in response to an award that used to be active from 1992, 1982 to 1991, that was called Vesta Awards. So we made a Vest Award and gave them to folks who were mostly female identified, working in Los Angeles, making significant contributions to arts and culture. And Frank has a practice whereby she uses cardboard and makes all kinds of really incredible cardboard art kind of replicas as well. So then again, thinking about artist multiples, small scale, I collaborate with my partner Kim Kelly, who's also an artist, so we're looking at a letterpress print in part of something that is called the Box of Books, which was a series of books by Darren Klein and Friends. And then recently, this past summer, myself and Kim Kelly created something called Mist, Midsummer Infused Solstice Tea. And so this was a tea that we created and distributed, harvested in Maine, geographically similar kinds of flora to what we find here in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and letterpress tags. So this was an addition of 40 small tea bags, again, something that we consume and has a kind of shelf life in terms of freshness as well. So I'm shifting now to talk a little bit about ways that my work has been informed by teaching. So some of the students that I worked with as a teaching artist in Los Angeles County are school-age children. So I ran both, I worked in the education department at this non-for-profit at the Armory, running field trips. Any day of the week we might have anyone from a group of first graders to high school age students. And I also worked in regularly with sequential arts and science integrated programs where I designed projects and led field trips primarily with fourth graders as well as second and third graders in the San Gabriel Mountains. And so in this work, I started to integrate theater-based practices into my teaching, which I hadn't done before and I was terrified about, and it's so much fun. And I also started to learn about California native plants, and that was a way to kind of help ground me in place and space, learn from my own students, and then kind of teach what is around us, what is edible, what is poisonous. And the way that we start all of those classes, our children investigate the environment, is by creating an observational plant drawing. So these are some of the plant drawings, watercolors by 4th grade students. So this program, Children Investigate the Environment, was unique in that funding was available for school buses. So we were able to get into the mountains every other week and go on a field trip. We also had an adapted model at the Armory Center for the Arts where we would bring in plants to urban inner city schools where there wasn't funding and it was cost prohibitive to try to be able to get out into the wilderness or into a park. And so we'd bring in plants, observe them, and draw them. And my own practice then is informed by the work that I do teaching. And so thinking here about kind of indexing place, we're looking at some ceramic works that we're indexing time that I spent in Vermont, pressing leaves, cutting them out, playing with underglazes, and these objects then are installed kind of suspended in space. So thinking about small scale, a kind of collage actually with ceramics and with nature. Back to plant identification and engaging with plants and getting back into mobile art exhibitions. Myself and Kim Kelly created something called the AV STEAM. So thinking about AV as in audiovisual, but also thinking about genitals. We often engaged in saunas while living in Los Angeles. So saunas something called chayok, which is basically a tea steam, is something that has been part of Korean culture for many years, and in Los Angeles it's something that we were exposed to. And so we created a sauna, a mobile sauna with a zigzag bench where folks could sit on the bench, folks of all genders, and enjoy the very relaxing properties of having the mist and the kind of steam of tea on your bare genitals. And so this was a project that we installed one time, and we had used mugwort and calendula and a few different herbs, plants growing in the area in California. So again, kind of thinking about different ways to experience and sense space. So most recently, we did a low tide, high tea walk, and this was at a place called Matthews Island in Maine that has a kind of, that is accessible only twice a day at the very lowest tide. And so we invited a group of people to join us for a high tea and walk around the island, creating drawings and sharing space and sharing a picnic together. So at the low tide, high tea, we created some offerings to consume with some local duck eggs as well as seaweed, a few different edible plants from the area, and spent about 2 hours on the island together. And one of the folks actually who joined us at the low tide high tea years before, her family had owned the island, and so she had actually spent, it had been 50 years since she had been there, but she had spent a lot of time on the island. So so this was a walk that we did in July. So this was the residency in Eastport, and we collaborated with these folks from the Greenhorns, who are based in Maine, in Pembroke, Maine. A seaweed symposium was happening, and we were invited to do a workshop. So we joined the seaweed walk with artists and scientists and harvested some seaweed, and then we also created silkscreen prints because we felt uncomfortable. We didn't harvest a lot of seaweed, but thinking about kind of sustainability, we preferred to make silk-screened seaweed as a more sustainable kind of seaweed to integrate into this, the workshop that we were doing. So we were kind of responding to the history of craft in that area. Turks had knots, bracelets were everywhere in this small town. And and also prom was happening at this time. So we cooked up a workshop whereby we provided materials for folks to make their own seaweed corsages. And the corsages and the kind of materials that folks were able to use were actual seaweed, screen-printed seaweed. We dyed some wooden beads referencing blueberries that were coming in season at that time, and offered some workshops at the Eastport Pride in a few different locations as well. And so now moving from the very small scale and the handmade to something that is coming up that is larger, so scaling up. Okay, so Superadobe dome building. So Superadobe dome building is a sustainable way to create a shelter. I initially became exposed to this kind of architecture while living in the US and visiting a place called Cal Earth. Now, I was aware of straw bale building through Deirdre McGarren, good friend of mine. This is the person who went to Mount A, and cob building, and all across the world, humans have been building with what is under our feet for millennia. And so this method of Superadobe building is based on the lancet arch, so that's kind of the shape that we see here. So it's a self-supporting structure. I attended a workshop and built 2 domes, which we'll see. And here we're looking at the inside of a Superadobe earth bag dome. So the way that these work is that bags, and it could be a burlap bag, are filled with soil and water, and sometimes with a stabilizer, so there could be lime or even cement that is mixed with the soil. And then the bags are stacked one on top of each other in a kind of specific systematic way to create this lancet self-supporting arch, and then capped at the top. The building that we're looking at, the exterior and the interior here, the top is capped with this custom kind of unusual skylight. And the very first thing that we did in this workshop was to use bricks to create this self-supporting arch. We placed the bricks against a plywood structure and then removed the plywood structure, and if the bricks fell, no dice, you're in big trouble, but if the bricks stayed in place, then your lancet arch was secure. So thinking about this building technology, I'm going to show a few images of how to build one of these domes. So ultimately, I will be building one of these domes in California, and what we're looking at now is kind of a small-scale version that was built we made 2 domes, 20 people in 4 days. So you use a plumb line to measure out the radius of your dome, and you dig this kind of trench, and depending on where in the world you're creating this dome, there might need to be a more kind of developed drainage system. But this was built in the high desert, and so there is flash flooding and rain, but it doesn't tend to have a lot of snowpack, for example. So we use at CalArts these long tubular bags that they've developed, and they actually sell. So in other contexts, folks who are making earth bag domes are going to be using smaller burlap bags, or even the kinds of bags that are used to transport grain worldwide. But they have these super long tubes, and so you measure the tube and then you fill it with soil, and it really is this kind of group effort to make this handmade dome. So usually we were about 12 or so people on each dome. It's really labor intensive, so you kind of have to take breaks, and then one person is holding something that's kind of the size of a coffee can, so we can see that there's a person holding something and then the one with the hat. And so it's a 2-person thing where one person is holding open this tube and then somebody else is feeding in the soil into the tube. And then the next thing to do is to tamp it. So there is this metal tamper. You climb on top of the dome. This is a small one, and then you pound on the dome to compress the material. So compressing the soil that's mixed with water or a stabilizer as well. So when I had described this idea of a plywood support structure, we can see this one here that's inserted and then getting covered. Anytime that you cut into the dome, you have to basically support it by buttressing the outside. So what's referred to as buttress on the outside opening helps to support the dome such that when we take out the plywood structure, the dome will not collapse. So these are the 2 domes that we made in the 4-day workshop. They are teeny weeny. If you have to crawl inside them, and maybe 6 people could sit very intimately, not so comfortably. So the dome that I will be building will be about 14 feet across, And the idea is that it will be an accessible dome, so there will be 2 entrances, there will be seating inside, and enough width for a wheelchair to be able to get in as well. Finishing the dome there's lots of ways to finish it, but what we're seeing here is a raw plaster finish. So again, playing with recipes and looking at your soil content, how much clay and silt is in your soil. It's a little bit like sifting flour when you're baking a cake. So we collected soil from the site that we were at, and the soil was actually really good and tended to work well with raw with raw plaster. And then we mixed it with hay. Dung can also be used and is used in many places to create a plaster finish. It has a kind of supple plasticity that lends itself really well to being able to kind of get into cracks. And so the way that the raw plaster is applied is you really kind of thwack it onto the surface, and then you leave it, and then you thwack some more. And so it's really kind of messy, and again, a group effort. You kind of work together, and then it takes some time to dry and some time to crack. So in this workshop, skipping over here. So yeah, I guess looking at some more kind of examples of ways that this kind of building have been adapted. So here we're looking at Salvation Mountain, and Salvation Mountain is a place also in the high desert in California that what would be considered or called an outsider artist, Leonard Knight, worked on for his entire life. And so while this might not be Superadobe building per se, he was using hay bales and created this structure that you can walk in and walk on top of, and then he would dump cans of paint to create and kind of build up this shell on the outside. So rather than using raw plaster, he would use latex paint to kind of build up this surface. And this place is amazing. So basically you're in the desert, it's flat, there are no hills, and then out of nowhere comes this mountain. It's often used for photo shoots, and you can walk up. In terms of being able to get an artwork like this permitted, it would not be allowed now, but the artists worked on the land, I believe owned the land, and so it was kind of grandfathered in. But this is a place that you can visit. It's about 4 or 5 hours from Los Angeles. Super wild place. So then getting back to the raw plaster, Nedar Khalili, who is the founder of Cal Earth, was an Iranian-American architect, and he worked with different techniques for kind of maybe finessing the earth bag structures, both inside and out. So initially when he started making them, he had a background, he was an architect, but he had a background in ceramics as well, and he would actually set a fire inside the structure, almost like a reverse kiln, and he would finish his domes with clay and then set the thing ablaze and let the fire burn for a couple days, with the idea that he might be able to kind of cure and fire the domes. Finally, he discovered he didn't need to do that, but that there were ways to adapt recipes and use stabilizers instead. So the earth bag domes are not fired, but something that he did kind of finesse and perfect then was this idea of being able to create an outside shell with the raw plaster that wouldn't crack. So cracking, of course, with straw bale and rammed earth and earth bag structures that are covered with raw plaster, there is always a risk that with rain, cracks will occur. And so he kind of developed this idea that he called the reptile ball. So basically, instead of applying plaster in that kind of flat way that we saw a couple images back, the idea that you take this ball almost like you're making a snowball, and so you make these small balls and then you thwack them onto the outside of the earth bag surface. So the hairy orange that I will be building, I'm likely going to be using this kind of reptile ball for the exterior. These are a couple examples kind of showing maybe the potentiality of earth bag structures. So here's a Superadobe dome that's built in Nepal. The organization CalEarth does a lot of relief work with communities worldwide, and they will often be first kind of responders to build earthquake shelters. And so here we see a lime finished dome on the left, And then Shireen Guergus is an artist based in Los Angeles who created this temporary dome also in the desert, and this was for an event called Desert X. And so this was not a dome that humans were meant to go inside, but it was for pigeons. Here we're looking at an image. So now we're getting into images that are kind of culminating in the research that I've been doing in thinking about planning for this project. So I've been visiting various camera obscuras and sites, mostly, well, so far in North America. So what we're looking at here is something called the Forestier Underground Gardens. Baldessari Forestier was an immigrant from Italy, moved to New York City at the turn of the century, or just before, just at the end of the 1800s. And he worked digging tunnels, working on the metro system, so the Underground Railroad metro system in New York. And after doing that for several years, he moved to Fresno, California, and started building a home for himself underground. So by digging 6 feet underground, there's a stable temperature. And Fresno, California is a place that gets very, very hot. So he built this incredible structure, underground structure, tunnels to various rooms, and he also had a citrus orchard whereby the plants were planted underground. So if you go to this museum and you're walking, there'll be the kind of crown of an orange tree at your feet, so you can just bend down, pick up an orange like that, but the orange is actually growing and the roots are more than 10 feet underground. And the interior of his own home used Adobe kind of technology with kind of these undulating plaster walls. So thinking about different ways that folks have kind of adapted both earth bag technologies and this kind of idea of working with what you have. So working with the soil beneath your feet to create shelter and structure for yourself. And so here are some brass knobs that I cast in readying for the birth of the hairy orange. And we're looking here at a custom split door that's on one of the cabins, or rather one of the domes at CalEarth. So I'm imagining also creating a dome with a door that has a similar kind of shape, not a split door. So next we're looking at some drawings that are preliminary to my idea of planning for the hairy orange. After talking with Deirdre from Strawworks, she has advised that I work with an engineer, so this is part of the next step. I feel that it's important in the dome to be able to have 2 entrances for safety reasons, and to have seating both inside and outside, so a place to kind of rest and settle when you're inside the dome as well as when you're outside. And the beauty of working with earthbag is that these kind of like soft undulating shapes are kind of indicative of the way that the material is used. So if you tamp the bag in a certain way, you can kind of get this nice rolling effect, both for the inside and the outside. So in thinking about bird's eye view and floor plans, these were some of the designs that I am thinking about. I also like the idea that the dome might have some references either to the body, so thinking here about a uterus or maybe an elephant on the far left, a woman sign on the top right. So kind of thinking about subversive ways that the dome might be designed that may or may not be sensible, that we can sense or visible by being inside the dome. All right, and now onto the camera obscura. So one of my students I was working with at UCLA in an arts education program hosted, her name is Julie. She was facilitating a workshop, and my workshop on Saturday is inspired by that workshop. So we made camera obscura with cardboard tubes, and it was one of these moments where it was kind of a reminder where I was like, oh yeah, I visited some camera obscura before. That was really a kind of magical, interesting moment, and kind of sparked some ideas for me that have then been moving into to this plan for making the dome. So here are a few examples of camera obscura. So again, thinking about the darkened space. And so what a camera obscura is a normally So it predates photography. If you are in a dark room or a darkened space with a very small opening or kind of small aperture, since light travels in straight lines, the image from outside will appear on the inverse, upside down, in the space that you are in. So depending on how the lens is set up, that might be an image that is pouring across the whole space and across your own body, kind of implicating your own physicality, or it might be something that is focused on a round disc, or any other possibility of waves. And here on the bottom left is a dome that's made by a British artist named Chris Drury that sparked the idea for the Hairy Orange, in that I wanted to make a space where you are sharing space with others, and the image of the outside is pouring across your own body. This is a camera obscura in Nova Scotia, and it's created by the Coastal Studio class that's part of Dalhousie. And so, yes, so this is a camera obscura that was made in a kind of similar way, in that the bricks were stacked around a structure, a frame, and then the frame was removed. So, and this is a camera obscura I've just recently become aware of and have not visited yet. Maybe you have, it's so cool. But I've met with Dr. Kavanagh, and that's been really helpful to kind of problem solve some of the ways that he was able to adapt for this camera obscura. He created with his students in the Coastal Studio class a heated floor, and initially the idea of having a heated floor was to extend the period of time that folks could enjoy being in the camera obscura into the fall and winter season. And finally, what he discovered by having the heated floor, it actually helped lower the humidity level inside the space, inside the structure, which was really fantastic, so that mold didn't build up. And actually thinking about that idea of functionality and having the camera obscura in a public place, this camera obscura by Chris Drury recently has been filled with snakes, and it's in North Carolina in a sculpture garden. So thinking about the kind of risks and potentiality of wildlife, also of people, what happens when a structure and a shelter is placed in a public place or a semi-public place, and certainly it's something I'm thinking about in placing this in Los Angeles, where there is a significant homeless population. What does it mean to create a shelter that would be accessible or semi-accessible as well? So in thinking through what it's like being inside a camera obscura, I created this wearable camera obscura last summer and engaged with it in a few different ways. So sitting by myself in all kinds of different places, including the forest, inviting folks to perform around it, and then inviting folks to be inside of it. So I was kind of, and I'm still kind of thinking through these experiments and tests in terms of how programming is going to operate around this. So whether it would be a place to share a writing workshop, to make music, to hear music, to listen to music, how folks are going to be sharing space inside of the dome. I wore and kind of performed in the camera obscura at Cave and Basin, which in and of itself in Banff is, has this kind of, it's a dome in itself, right? So Cave and Basin has a hot spring that's inside this cavernous kind of cave space with a very small opening where light comes in. So this was kind of a doubling of the camera obscura, and this was a site that I wanted to spend time in because it was also a site where people's worlds were turned upside down when this was the site of internment during the First and Second World War. So then kind of thinking more about sharing space and in location. This was a concert that I attended inside a I'm forgetting the name of this. Yeah, observatory. Thank you. And so there were dancers and musicians, and while we were in the space, the observatory was actually moving really subtly, slowly moving as well. So I guess something I didn't say earlier is the kind of initial idea of creating the Hairy Orange came through an opportunity to to work with the Armory Center for the Arts, where I was working as a teaching artist, and propose a public artwork specifically in Pasadena. So Pasadena, California is a place that has a long history of citrus agriculture. And so connecting with this place that I was already working in schools, spending a lot of time in field trips, this is kind of how the idea initially came about. So I'm gonna, the next images we're looking at are things that I've been collecting in part of my research, and I'm looking for ways to kind of figure out how to index this research in the project, the larger project. I have a drawing practice, and I'm tending to think that I'm probably going to be creating drawings based around some of these images to expand on the stories and the histories of the kind of geographies that have informed the project. So I'm just going to cruise through some of these. This image I included because I am thinking about the missions in California that displaced indigenous cultures of the Tongva people, the Gabrielenos. We're looking at an armature for a work in progress of a replica of a Tongva shelter. And then the image behind it is of orange orchards that were in the foothills of the San Gabriels. So again, thinking about the impact of settler culture and the significance of what it means to build something that is permanent. And then most of the images we're looking at now are of printed matter. Many of them are postcards and photos that would have been produced in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Ooh, except for this one of Anne of Green Gables. I don't know if any folks went to the Mosaic Canada 150 exhibition. It was so weird. But this is, so thinking here about kind of the artifice, the artificial, the figure who's on the left is in a studio with an artificial orange tree posing. And then here we see a topiary of Anne of Green Gables. So in terms of kind of the narrative and history of Western expansion, the railroad plays a significant role in the story of citriculture and agriculture in the West and in California. So I am interested in indexing the history of the railroad and also the history of strikes within the agricultural industries that we all benefit from. And so I was maybe kind of surprised to find some of these postcards that really speak to that history in kind of really naive ways. And so here we see an image of strikers. So these are Chinese, and they were not Chinese American because the immigrants who worked on the railroad in the late 1800s were not actually allowed to be citizens, I think until 1946 in the US. So these were folks that striked on the Donner Pass. So this was creating the railroad that basically provided access so that oranges could move in and out of the country and across the continent. So in this history, many of the railroad workers were also, who immigrated from China to the US, were also expert orange farmers and then worked as laborers in Pasadena and in the valley. And so there was discrimination and backlash by the white settler communities of workers, and this is not news, this is still happening in North America and worldwide. So this is also something that I'm interested in indexing in the project. Something that is really groovy about the LGBT archives is the button collections. I'm sure we all have button collections at home as well. So this Anita Bryant Sucks Oranges is a button that I had found at One Archives. And there's a connection here as well. So Anita Bryant was this brand ambassador for the Florida Citrus Commission and also led a campaign called Save Our Children, which basically discriminated against LGBT folks in the workplace. So you could be fired if you were thought to be, or if you were gay identified. And so this was in 1977. So there was a kind of US-wide boycott by LGBT communities at bars mostly, where folks stopped drinking orange juice. And so so orange and vodka drink, screwdrivers, those were off the menu. But in terms of this idea of mobility through boycott and social justice movements, there's a connection there, and a few different boycotts that I'm interested in signaling to as well. And I worked with some of the collections from a place called the Church of the Epiphany in Los Angeles that was a hub for activism, where Cesar Chavez and farm worker unionists worked and created, had meetings. It was a meeting place, and then also created a publication called La Raza. And so I became aware of that kind of history and the history of striking in the Valley a few years ago, and so I am interested in kind of looking back at that as well. So we're moving now into the theme of roadside attractions. While on tour with the Bookmobile, we drove all across North America and saw lots of giant things. So on the right is an orange at a place called the California Citrus State Historic Park. And this is a park where you can have an edible tour, walk around, and taste citrus that's growing. This is in Riverside, California. Taking a look at the time, and I'm going to keep moving forward. But thinking about roadside attractions and what necessitated them. Looking at this giant bread loaf here on the right. So this sculpture that was made in Vancouver so I believe it was made it was made around World War II, and it was made in response to the fact that in Vancouver there was concern that Vancouver would be hit, and so folks were not allowed. So there were folks were not allowed to turn lights on at night, which included neon lights. So in terms of being able to advertise with neon lights, which was really hot at the time, a lot of entrepreneurs then had to think of other ways that they could kind of signal their products. And so this giant hand with the giant bread is an example of one of those. And Canada's Gigantic is a book that came out in 1988, which tracks many of these large roadside attractions throughout Canada, some of which I have visited. So in my heart, the world's largest fiddleheads is something that looms large. As a child growing up in Ottawa, we would drive back on the Plaster Rock Highway, and we would see this before driving for 2 hours through the clear cut to get to Miramichi. And so again, kind of thinking about, and my grandfather was a logger, so thinking about my own kind of history as a settler in that place where I was born, and traveling through space. The Oxford blueberry apparently used to have arms, and recently the arms have been amputated. They are no longer. So thinking here about the idea of defacing property, and then also impacting nature. So there is this movement, this Leave No Trace movement, that's been in response to excessive geotagging of natural sites. And so thinking here about about impacting space and kind of the idea of sustainability, both in building, natural building practices, and also in ways that we engage with nature. And here I am, so I included this image of the photographer Laura Aguilar. This is a landscape that I spent a lot of time walking in, and then became aware of Laura's work maybe 5 years ago. And her work really kind of indexes with her own body sites. So thinking again about the idea that the hairy orange will also kind of cite the space that it's in. And I'm going to move through the idea of the timeline for what is coming up with this project. The idea with the Hairy Orange is that I will be collaborating with some community partners, and so these may or may not include CalEarth, so that's the place where I learned how to build the domes. Project Q, oh, I haven't talked about the hairiness yet. So Project Q is a mobile salon. So it's a salon that was started by a trans-identified person of color named Madden Lopez. Also in an Airstream trailer, we met on a panel about mobile art. And so Project Q travels around California mostly right now, offering free haircuts to people. And then Food Forward. So Food Forward, and thank you for those who attended. I know you have to go to class. Food Forward is one of a few different organizations that is a food justice organization that redistributes excess food and harvests food, and so redistributes through channels and to food deserts within California, or within Los Angeles, rather. So I can talk more about these partners as well. I'm going to move through some of these slides. Here's an image of the inside of the Airstream trailer of Project Q. So Project Q will be invited on site to give haircuts. We're going to collect the human hair and embed that into the raw plaster. So we may also use dung, we may also use hay. We're going to be figuring out some recipes, but here is where this kind of intergenerational biological co-mingling happens in partnering with Project Q. And in most of the work that I've done that was really kind of foundational with the work that I did with the bookmobile, my kind of preferred way of working is in collective modes and through partnerships. I feel that there's so much benefit that way. And so Food Forward is, I spoke about earlier, Food Forward and another place. Oh yeah, so Food Forward redistributes food. So this is a terrifying map of food deserts in Los Angeles County. So thinking about places where fresh food is not available, so only kind of fast food would be available. And so the spaces that are highlighted in green indicate places that would be identified as food deserts in those places. Okay, Bill Pullman from Spaceballs founded a thing called the Hollywood Orchard. So some friends actually from Montreal came to visit LA, and they were like, oh, we heard about this like orange picking event that's happening on a Saturday, let's go. So we went. So Bill Pullman works within the community that he lives and hosts a kind of orange harvest in the wintertime, which is when the oranges are are ripe. And so this would be programming that I will be facilitating around the Hairy Orange. So oranges in Los Angeles are so easy to come by because most of LA and also Pasadena was a former orange orchard. Now that I'm based in Halifax, I have discovered that I am living in a place that was an apple orchard. So apples and oranges. And in thinking about this idea of collection and harvesting and accessing land and who has who has access to land and privilege in doing so, I have been reading the poetry of Leanne Simpson, and the part that I'm going to read describes a flyer that Leanne and folks from the Fourth World Problems Collective distributed prior to collecting maple syrup in an urban context in Ontario. So I'm going to read this flyer. That's from the Book of Poetry. Hello, we are collecting sap from this maple tree from March 21st to 23rd. We will be by to collect it once a day, and we will pick up the bucket, lid, and spigot on March 23rd. Thank you for your support in our urban sugar-making adventure. All right, and so this is the slide I'm going to end on. This is my current reality. So trying to figure out permitting plans for this project. I've been in consultation with lots of different folks and in communication with host venues, a city, a park, a university, and when we start talking about building permits, everybody is very wary. And so this is where I'm at right now. I'm the project is in formation. I'm open to feedback, and I hope that you come to the workshop on Saturday. So on Saturday, we're going to be walking around Sackville, and like many of the projects I do, the work that we make is going to be made by whoever shows up. And so we can go to spots in Sackville that have significance to you, and look at things upside down. And I also want to connect to this idea of the upside down displacement and embodying place through collective experiences. So, yeah, that's it, my friends. Thank you so much. Please have an orange if you like. Yeah, the water table is physically sinking, that's right. And water's not regulated in agriculture and farming in California. It's a major problem. Yes, definitely. Yeah, it's in the news on a regular basis. It is, yeah. What's happening about it? Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. This project, I am committed to doing it in California, but I have been talking with Deirdre McGarren of Strawworks, and so, yeah, there are earth bag domes that are in North America and in Canada, and I don't know if there's any in Nova Scotia and in New Brunswick or in this area, the Atlantic provinces or the Maritimes, but absolutely, yeah, and there's different ways to kind of weatherproof and again, have drainage that's appropriate for the site and for the environment. Yeah, yeah. That's not my plan right now, though. Maybe part 2.